Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts here this morning bring us closer to understanding that you call not only prophets, but you call all of us to do the work of building your kingdom right here on earth. Amen. So this last week I started my prep by rereading the entire book of Jeremiah, and I would highly recommend that you all go home and do the same. I wanted to make sure that I was remembering things correctly because when I was in seminary, we were doing this book, and we nicknamed Jeremiah Eeyore. We said he was the Eeyore of all the prophets. And I thought, boy, I'm sure glad I don't have his job. While there are days I feel close, I was really glad I didn't have a job like his. God asked him to do some of the strangest things. Told him to go out and purchase a brand new loincloth, wear it, walk around in nothing but a loincloth, okay? And then take it off, tuck it away in a place by the river, leave it, and then go back when it was thoroughly ruined and put it on and walk around in it again. Asked him to take a great big giant clay pot and break it in front of everybody. All of these sign acts for what was happening to Israel at the time, to Judah. And he was never allowed to marry. He was persecuted very closely to the point of death. Sure glad I don't have a job like Jeremiah's. He was just a boy when God called him. And he called him at a key juncture in Israel's history. I use Israel as that's what we're familiar with, but really in actuality it was Judah. The nation of Israel was a nation for such a tiny, short period of time before it was split into two, Israel in the north, Judah in the south. And usually when you hear references to Israel, they're talking about Judah. And so Judah has been a vassal state of Assyria, and the Assyrian king has died, and everybody is celebrating. Yay, we're out from under the boot heel of empire. And God calls Jeremiah and says, I want you to go tell them to knock that off. It ain't over. It's going to happen again. It's going to happen again, and not only is it going to happen, most of you are going to get carted off to a foreign land, to Babylon. Now, prophets in Jeremiah's day came in multiple stripes. You had temple court prophets who were hired and paid by the temple and the court, and their job was to speak the temple or court line, kind of like presidential press secretaries. And then you had independents. Jeremiah was an independent, and nobody welcomed what he had to say at that point. Nobody wanted to hear what he had to say, what God was telling him to say to them. Aren't you glad we don't have jobs like Jeremiah? Problem is, we really do have jobs like Jeremiah's. Now, I want you to keep in mind that even though this sounds like Jeremiah's story, the bigger picture is that it's really God's story. It's a story of a God who breaks into the world by using ordinary people, a boy nonetheless, barges into our lives and says, you, I got a job for you. And if we acknowledge that we are part of this story, we have jobs like Jeremiah's. God calls each and every one of us to be a part of that story. And there just is something, if you look at Scripture over and over and over, resistance to being called by God is just plain human nature. Jeremiah says, I'm too young, I'm just a boy. Abram and Sarai say, we're way too old. Isaiah says, I'm not holy enough. Gideon says, I'm too weak. And Moses says, what? You want me to be a spokesperson for you? I stutter. It's only natural to live out of our limitations. But God knows each and every one of us, knows what we are capable of. At the beginning of this passage, he says, I knew you from the time you were in the womb, and I consecrated you to be a prophet, even then. Now, you can get bogged down in arguing, well, God has this exact plan and has every single piece of your life mapped out, or you can look at it more along the lines of, God knows what you're capable of and knows you're not living into it and is going to push you and call you. Doesn't matter which way you look at it. Living into call, living into what each of us was created to be to its fullest, ends up really ultimately being good for us and good for the world. Frederick Buechner defines vocation as that place where our deepest gladness meets the world's deepest need. And we all decided in seminary that that just didn't apply to Jeremiah. That just, we felt really sorry for Jeremiah out of all the prophets. But in general, when we live into God's call, we get transformed, and that transformation ripples out into the world, and the world gets transformed. Recently, Agape International celebrated, I think it was its 10th anniversary. And this organization came out of a calling that this couple initially resisted. Don Brewster was a pastor of Adventure Church in Roseville, and he and his wife Bridget took a vacation to Cambodia, came back and said, never going to do that again, never going back there. That was not a vacation. And then the next thing they knew, they read an article in the paper about child sex trafficking in Cambodia. And they thought, somebody needs to do something about that. And then, lo and behold, somebody came to their church to talk about it. And then they saw it someplace else, and it finally dawned on them. Oh, that somebody must be us. That's why it's popping up over and over. And so the last place on earth they ever wanted to go back to, they have gone back to, and millions of children have been rescued from a life of sex trafficking. Millions, because they answered the call. When we live into God's call on our lives, we get changed, and so does the world. Now, those calls, our vocations, are not always, we always tend to think of call as being strictly to something religiously affiliated. How many of you can think back and mark a teacher who made a difference in your life? That is every bit as much a call as something religiously affiliated. We are gifted with talents, and we've been hearing about how the Spirit gifts us with these spiritual gifts, and they're all given to us not to hoard, not to pat ourselves on the back and accumulate for ourselves, or to live a comfortable life. They're given to us for the common good. I was at a church retreat in Sonoma Saturday morning that was just wonderful, and one of the things those folks were lamenting is that there no longer seems to be any idea of the common good in this country. It's all about what each individual group wants. Aren't you glad we don't have a job like Jeremiah's? Sorry, we do. We really do. Jan Rawlings recently sent me a link to an article from the Ministry Matters website, and at first I thought, I'll send it out as a epistle, it's part of the epistle link. But I know how that goes. You see the link, you have good intentions, and you never go back to it and read it. I thought about running off copies and killing a few trees and leaving them in the back, and you forget that they're there. So I'm going to read you a couple paragraphs of it, because it really goes to us discerning as a church Where is God calling us? Where is God calling us right here in this community? The title of the article is Why Many Welcoming Churches Are Dying Churches. And I know some of you hate it when I speak to that, but sometimes I do have a job like Jeremiah. It's no secret that our culture is becoming increasingly secular. What's frustrating is that a lot of our churches still operate with the assumption that everybody knows about the church. Where I believe my church and others fall short is meeting people where they are and joining in on the conversations they are already having. We still seem to want people to meet us where we are, right here. At a recent visioning meeting, we talked about how we can reach our community and let them know that our church exists. A majority of the ideas were something along the lines of a facelift for our campus so that we can look fresher, brighter, newer for the people driving by. If they see a new landscape, they might think there's life in the church and may want to come and check us out. That's all good, but a new landscape or change of color of the church building isn't going to draw people in. That's the second mistake many of us make. Not only do we assume that a majority of our major neighbors know about church, we also look at outreach through the lens of the question, how do we get people into our pews, rather than really being missional? He goes on to say, my church is absolutely welcoming. We are a very welcoming church when people come here. Many other churches are also welcoming and happy, gracious, and grateful to meet new families. But a welcoming church can easily become a dying church. Welcoming suggests passively waiting for people to come to be embraced, much like a dog anticipating and waiting for its master to come home. Yes, we need to be welcoming, but more importantly, we need to be invitational. We can't just wait and assume people are going to show up, because they won't. What's not okay is for us to mistake the words of Jesus to go for stay and wait for people to come, no matter how welcoming we may be. Those are tough words to live into. And we have had for quite a while a major hole in our leadership here. I keep bringing it up. I keep inviting people to pray about it and discern if God's calling you to it, but we have no outreach mission chair. No outreach mission chair. How many of you have gone home and contemplated that? Lifted it up in prayer. Asked God, are you calling me to this? Could you be calling me to this? We do have a job like Jeremiah, folks. But you know what? Another article I read just was wonderful because it was titled, and it was on the whole book. Go home and read the whole book. Jeremiah as a messenger of hope in crisis. And he wrote a description of what was happening in Jeremiah's day and looked at how it overlapped with what's happening in our day. Cities in crisis, schools in disarray, a burgeoning national debt that threatens future generations and whittles away at already dwindling funds for basic human services. Preemptive military doctrines that destabilize large regions and erode international morale and morality. New technologies that result in alienation and dehumanization. Consumerist values that anesthetize us to our true selves. Immigration legislation rooted in xenophobia and garbed in evangelical piety. Global economic policies that breed resentment, rage, and abject despair. Rapid depletion of non-replaceable natural and cultural resources. Limited access to basic health care. Mounting indifference to violence. Children exploited as sexual commodities. I know you don't come to church to hear those things. I've actually had some of you say that to me. Please don't preach on that stuff. That's not what I come here for. I come here to feel good. I agree. There needs to be a balance. You come to be fed, but you also are called. And call isn't easy. Not easy. But you know what? The good news is this isn't our story. It's God's story. We're just part of it. We're just part of it. And when we accept God's calling for us, God equips us for the job at hand. God does that because God loves us and loves everybody out there and wants the world to be the good creation He created it to be. It is our job.